But I just wanted to set up our topics just a little bit here. And so, and thank you, Grace, for the introduction to MICD and to our programs. To say to our gathered mayors and city staff that key to all the work that we do is the belief that the mayor is the city's chief urban designer. They are the convener, they're the vision setter and shepherder, the one who can keep their city moving forward, always striving to attain a more livable, resilient, equitable, and thriving community. And all of the programs that we run are geared around preparing and supporting mayors to harness that part of their role. But for the 38 years of our programs, the over 1,200 mayors that have gone through our programs now, mayors have returned to us with a few key questions kind of over and over again. And, those are things like, how do we, we have all of these plans. How do we prevent them from just sitting on shelves? How do I shape my administration to ensure outcomes in the built environment that are well designed, that are inclusive, that contribute to a higher quality of life that we're all seeking, but that they don't scare away development or increase the cost of development? How do we use design to set expectations? Maybe even create more certainty in the approvals process so that it can be used as a tool for both city staff and for private development. And I want to say from the very beginning that we don't have all the answers here yet, but over the last year, we've started taking a deeper dive into these questions. We've talked to a whole bunch of people who are out there doing this work already and have started to develop a framework and some strategies that we're ready to share with you today. This isn't exhaustive. It's really more of a kind of sampling of precedents and strategies that we're seeking out that we're seeing are working. And through some additional funding that we have from the National Endowment for the Arts, thank you, NEA, we'll be continuing this exploration this year and into next, developing some more specific and in-depth tools and resources. So, as you hear things today that are particularly of interest, please let us know. If you're out there doing more work that we should know about and share with other cities, please let us know. And of course, if you have questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm not sure if the chat's fixed. Definitely, I can see some stuff in the Q&A for the discussion after the presentation. Also, assuming the chat is working, before I introduce our primary speaker, I know that we have a lot of mayors and city level staff administration officials registered today. Would love to know who we have in the room and your departments or titles. So please, drop your name, city, and your role in either the chat or the Q&A, whatever's working. But we have a fantastic presenter, friend of MICD with us today, sharing some of the work that he also brought to us during the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting in Kansas City last month. Want to introduce you to Gerardo Garcia. So Gerardo is the founder of the Urbanism Bureau based in Chicago. He's a licensed architect and urban designer that focused on driving equitable development in communities that need it most. He was a former deputy planning commissioner for the city of Chicago and understands deeply the challenges and opportunities that you all are facing in your cities, has led some incredible initiatives in Chicago, where he was responsible for ensuring that the city's economic development goals were supported by thoughtfully designed buildings that enhanced neighborhoods where it matters most, on the streets and in the sidewalks where people live and work. You may see his past virtual seminar that he did with us about a year ago on some of those topics. But by concentrating those efforts to bring design excellence into underinvested areas, this sparked an enormous amount of subsequent investment. But we have brought him on to help us with this initiative. I think we might hear a little bit about some stuff that they did in Chicago while he was there, but we're delighted to have him back to us, talk to you about how you can bring these values and practices into your work and into your city structures. And welcome, Gerardo. I see your face right now, so I know that you're live. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Trinity, and thanks everyone for taking out of your time to join the virtual seminar. At risk, can you guys see my screen full screen right now? Okay, perfect. So thanks again, Trinity and the MICD team, really for being amazing collaborators on this work and this research that we've been doing for close to a year now. And as Trinity mentioned, that this is a problem that I've wrestled with for a good part of my career in city government. And so really appreciative of the opportunity to dive into it, to think about it a little bit more critically, and also have to take a moment to thank the NEA and the U.S. Conference of Mayors for their support of the Mayors Institute. With that, as I mentioned, we've been doing this research for the better part of the year, and we really kind of landed on needing to define urban design. And how we did that was through this framework that really deals with some of what we consider to be key elements of cities. Starting with the public realm and how people get around cities, and how we prioritize different forms of mobility, and land use, and its ability to promote really healthy and fair development in communities, and how we might define economic development through community wealth building and opportunities for the residents of our cities, as well as, really importantly, history, art, culture, and identity, and the responsibility that cities have of empowering communities to express these creatively. And so we feel that good urban design happens at the intersection of these elements. And the results of that can be equitable open space, just and fair zoning, inclusive housing, and really redefining how we think about our open space in our streets to create beautiful streets and open spaces. Um, and at the end of the day, and what we're talking about here is the art of making places for people, and you start to see that across the city with various levels of success from different cities, and across scale. So you can see everything from very small installation to something more intense, to complete redevelopment of city blocks and parcels. So really, it runs the gamut of making places for people to feel worthy and dignified. And ultimately, and we're a little biased here, but ultimately, it begs the question of who leads these processes of making places for people in our cities. And all roads lead to the mayor. And obviously, there are a lot of different actors here, whether it be city council and different city agencies and your boards and commissions at the government level, but also in the private sector, developers, financial institutions, design professionals, all come together through the leadership of the mayor to think and rethink, and have the opportunity to rethink how we build and shape our cities. So today we're going to take some time to share with you guys some case studies of projects that we've scanned from across the country, and they really run a range of work that's more low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better term, to really work that might require some more commitment, and really becomes maybe part of the legacy of a city administration. So starting with the very simple concept of showcasing the good work that your city is already doing, to thinking about how we redefine our city hall as civic commons, or take them back to that place of being really civic and community hubs, and understanding that we don't have to do it all ourselves, and seeking and finding civic partners to do some of this work, as well as thinking about how we organize and structure our governments to deliver some of the outcomes that we want to, and looking at some of the innovative processes that we see from across the country. And lastly, and as Trinity kind of outlined in her introduction, some of these deal with recurring issues that we hear from professionals, from mayors, and the idea of how do we communicate the value of good design to communities and to our constituents really continues to come up constantly. So starting with showcase the work, a couple case studies are the Denver's Mayor's Design Awards. And this is an interesting program that has gone on for many years in Denver. And really, the mayor and city government come together to celebrate and recognize good design projects across the city. And they really range anything from private development to civic buildings, to art installations, open space projects. And so the idea that this is work that's already going on in the city, how do we take a moment to celebrate the really good work? And it also begins to create an expectation within the development community, and our own city agencies of what we qualify as good urban design and good design. Another similar program is Milwaukee's Mayor's Design Awards. And we actually had Mayor Johnson share some of this program with us in Kansas City for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And I think a really key takeaway from us there is that there's a very unique partnership with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which actually organizes and hosts the event on a yearly basis and supports city staff in really finding and recognizing work across the city to celebrate. So after each one of these case study sections, we're going to talk a little bit about implementation, some of the thoughts and best practices that we've learned in interviewing folks doing this work across the country. And we're going to talk about it in like now, near, next, right? What can we do now? What can we do after that? And then, really thinking a little bit more long term and maybe even in terms of legacy of the administration. But really, overall, these mayoral design award programs are a relatively easy lift. And within that, you could start small and identify 1 to 2 categories of projects to celebrate of work that the administration, the city is already doing. So most cities have landmarks divisions that review projects. They may even have a similar program where they're recognizing really good projects regularly. Affordable housing projects are also something that a lot of cities instigate or support. And so there's an opportunity there to celebrate some of the good work that's coming out of existing programs and work streams already. I think within that and after that is thinking about how to use social media to celebrate well-designed development. And it also becomes an opportunity to market your city as economic development trends to a larger audience. And then thinking a little bit more long-term is considering some of those partnerships to host and organize the award ceremonies, to expand award categories. And this is where universities and civic organizations can play a really interesting role and be great resources for your administrations. Oh, and moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about taking City Hall back to being a place of public commons. And in our research, we actually found this interesting Instagram account, Public Sector Office, which is essentially a treasure trove of images like you see on the screen of public servants from across the country submitting pictures of what their workspaces look like and what government offices tend to look like across the country. And for those of us in government, these are very familiar scenes. And so the idea that the people that are doing the work that are expected to deliver really good design outcomes are working in these spaces really begs a question of like, where do we start here? And so, I think a really good example that we came across is the Sky Building in Oakland Park, Florida, where it's really a mixed-use development. So it becomes a public-private partnership where City Hall takes a prominent role and a prominent place in the development. And so, new amenities, new spaces for employees and residents to conduct their business essentially through creative kind of partnerships with the private sector. Moving over a little bit to my hometown, some work that I was fortunate to support earlier in my career was during the Rahm Emanuel administration. The city essentially rolled out a program to co-locate affordable housing with public library branches. And so that's the image that you see on the upper right hand here. And so thinking about investments that already had to be made and how to maximize them and make them efficient by bringing them into one site essentially and bringing more services, better services out to the community. A permutation of that or an evolution of that in the lower right-hand corner is actually the Park District headquarters, which is out in a community in Chicago. And it serves as a field house, a recreation center, a community hub, and the citywide administrative offices for the Park District, walking distance to a transit station. And then we also see examples of this in Detroit during the Detroit Future City planning processes, where these neighborhood planning and design resource centers were set up. And they're welcoming spaces in communities where residents can come in and participate in workshops and lectures, and really feel like they have like they're active participants in the reshaping and re-envisioning of their city. And moving over to Cleveland, the specific library that you're seeing here in the background is actually Cleveland City Hall and its municipal library. And so again, thinking about how a city hall can be a place where folks can come and do more than your typical kind of city business, where it can be activated with other resources. But I think another larger takeaway here is, a few years ago, Cleveland Public Libraries underwent a 10-year capital improvement plan and master plan process for all 27 of its branch libraries, and really took the time to rethink how these libraries could function beyond your traditional branch, and thinking about this city service more as a community hub and an anchor. And some of that work is ongoing. Their capital plan is ongoing, and they're building these libraries as we speak, or modernizing libraries as we speak in Cleveland. And I promise this will be the last Chicago slide, but one of the efforts that I was fortunate enough to lead for the city of Chicago during my time there was the Invest Southwest RFP process. So over the course of about 3 years, the Department of Planning released almost 20 RFPs or RFQs for development sites, either city-owned or in some cases privately owned, but certainly all heavily city subsidized across the south and west sides of Chicago, which for those who aren't familiar with Chicago, are really the disinvested parts of our city. And what we were able to do through this request for proposals is set some very clear expectations around design excellence, around equitable wealth building in communities, and set the expectation for development teams that this is what we wanted. And so what you see on the cover of all of these RFPs is actually a rendering of a vision that was created by city staff, or city staff in partnership with consultant teams, so that we rendered visible to developers exactly the type of development and the quality of development that we wanted to see. And on the left are a couple examples of some of those projects that were actually awarded and will be under construction soon here in Chicago. And this is a theme across the city. And so we see in Florida, in Pensacola, Mayor Reeves, actually an alum of some of MICD's programming and technical assistance program as well, led the process to release an RFP or an RFQ for the design of this linear park that was essentially a highway removal project. And central to the RFQ was this notion of really repairing past harms and doing it through the lens of equity, and the harms that these highway projects inflicted on communities, in the earlier part of the last century, or the second half of the last century. And the city of Pensacola was very specific and very clear in this desire. And so the idea that we can take investments that we're already making, that we already have to make, that are part of government processes, but also think about how we leverage them to meet the needs of our cities and our constituents in the moment. And so thinking about implementation, I think when we go back to thinking about City Hall as a civic commons, really considering user experience, both for residents and employees, and how you think about City Hall and creating a community hub. And for obvious reasons, there's security concerns, there's accessibility concerns, and programming. But I think giving some careful thought to these really could allow for some unique opportunities to rethink how many of our city halls are functioning today. In the near term, we can consider creative programming and temporary uses. And thinking a little bit long term is, how do we take some of the investments that we have to make and co-locate city services within City Hall or in communities. So whether we do remote city halls or community design centers, resident engagement officers, um, how do we think creatively about bringing our services to our residents? Um, and moving on to civic partnerships. So the idea that we don't have to do it all ourselves as government. Um, and and I think the Charleston Civic Design Center really presents an interesting case study. The Civic Design Center in Charleston was started as a separate nonprofit organization that was certainly supported by the mayor and city government at the time. And it evolved over time to eventually be part of the city's planning department. And most currently, its current evolution, it's actually still within city government, but a direct report to the mayor's office in Charleston. So on top of the structure and the evolution of the organization, there's also something to say about its physical space. So it's in this wonderful old historic building in Charleston, and the second story is actually the design division, and that's the workspace for staff and for the team. And the ground floor actually has workshop rooms and presentation rooms where the public, where meetings can be held, where folks can be educated and understand what the implications of projects are. And so really, it reinforces the point of the spaces that we do this work of re-envisioning really matter, to maximize creativity and help folks feel welcome. Another interesting case study is the Nashville Civic Design Center. And it really has an interesting history because it started as a grassroots organization where design community and other folks who were just interested in the built environment organized against a highway project in Nashville. One of those folks was actually Mayor Purcell before he was elected mayor. And over time, he eventually did become elected mayor, and he understood the potential that this organization or that this group had and encouraged them to formalize and become a civic design center. So through his leadership, this organization, one, has worked with a series of administrations over the years, but has also done some really impactful work in the city of Nashville, including the Plan of Nashville, which is now nearly 20 years old, but that they continue to work on and update as time passes and as priorities shift. But they also take on some of these smaller placemaking projects, which relatively are quicker and cheaper to implement in most cases, and really can have a great impact on the public realm and how people interact in the public realm. And obviously, I think this is a wonderful example of this activation coming to life with children playing around it and creating music. In terms of implementation, I think very easy to think about how we might engage existing partners and even university partners to think about incubating a civic design center if one doesn't exist in your city. In the near term, really investing in specific projects and plans that could be led by a CDC. More and more, we're starting to see that across the country. And then in the longer term, really consider formally integrating the CDC into your government and processes, whether it's a representative from a CDC as part of a design review committee, or a CDC could lead a design review process, and allocating funding for planning studies and resident education and engagement to be led by those CDCs. And next, we're going to talk about organizational structures, and I'm moving a little bit quicker for the sake of time here because I want to make sure we have some discussion. But in this particular instance, we learned about the Tulsa Department of City Experience, and this was really a reorganization of by Mayor Bynum, as they say in Tulsa, of everything above ground, right? And it was led by these four principles of planning and designing, inviting, and connected places for residents, connecting people to places and within them, ensuring residents' voices are heard, and maintaining safe places. And those four principles guided the reorganization or the organization of the Department of City Experience to encompass the Tulsa Planning Office, where they're doing projects and long-range planning, the creation of the city design studio, encompassing the community development office, the mayor's office of resilience, citizen advocacy, animal welfare, to really make sure that all four legs of that stool, if you will, were being supported properly by the right city agencies, and that everyone was working in concert to attain those goals. And I think another important note to walk away from with this model, and maybe even the previous one, is that the proximity to the mayor and how government is organized really matters. And we kept hearing this over and over from our colleagues in different cities across the country. So to say that, I'm an office that within the mayor's office carries weight in being able to get things done in cities across the country. And an example of getting things done is Zinc Lake Park in Tulsa. And this is part of a larger improvement along the Arkansas River, but certainly required local funds and local resources to make happen. And so it's an open space amenity, it's a public realm amenity, but it also connects a part of Tulsa that historically would not have access to this amenity with this pedestrian bridge that you see here in the background. And so thinking about implementation, I think as Trinity mentioned, we hear over and over from folks this notion that there's so many plans and so many studies that they're just gathering dust and nothing is getting done. And so I think a really easy place to start is to conduct an audit of those plans and identify those pain points, and start to think about how you might implement them or get beyond the pain points. And then consider how to best organize your government to deliver city services and projects with good urban design in mind. In the near term, anchoring your administration with planning and design services. And again, this notion of proximity to the mayor, of putting planning and design professionals at the forefront of these goals. And in the longer term, maybe considering reorganizing your cabinet to achieve desired planning and design outcomes. Lastly, well, not lastly, talking about innovative processes. The irony here is that we're going to New York City to probably their oldest commission in the city, dating back to the late 1800s, which is the Public Design Commission, or PDC for short. The thing that's interesting about the PDC, or a couple things, is that they review any publicly funded projects or projects on city land. And that gives them pretty wide purview, from buildings to streetscapes to public art. The PDC has an executive director and staff that report up to the mayor, and each of the city's preeminent cultural institutions appoint a representative. And within that is the Fine Arts Federation, whose sole purpose actually was founded to appoint 7 interdisciplinary members to this commission. And so these are the folks that are reviewing everything from affordable housing to streetscapes to public art installations to pocket parks across New York City. And a project that our colleagues in New York really point to as a point of pride is Hunters Point South, which is a waterfront open space project, but that was done in coordination with a redevelopment of a pretty significant amount of land here, and the expectation of thousands of affordable units. And so the thought that an open space project could lead this notion of redevelopment is something that really came out of that review process, and that really was reinforced through that review process that the PDC runs. And so in terms of implementation, I think this is a really wonderful opportunity for city government to work with the private sector and convene and workshop how to best leverage their talents. I think across the country, design professionals in general are more than willing to serve and to have an impact on their cities. In the near term, we can think about buttressing approval processes with clear design guidance, as well as forming an advisory design review panel. An advisory being the operative term, that these are folks that maybe don't necessarily have immediate authority, but that are leveraging their expertise for your planning department or whatever review bodies benefit. And thinking more in the long term, if there is success with this, how do you begin to formulate and legislate these panels and these structures into city processes? As as has been done in New York, right? So the PDC is actually part of the legislative code in the city. It's a body. It's a legislative. It's a body that was legislated into ordinance in New York City. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the value of good design, and this is one of those recurring themes that comes up as we talk to folks around the country. And some, I think, a really important example to highlight here is that so much of this work happens outside of the day-to-day kind of planning and policy work that cities do. But it really does have implications within that. So here we have a screen capture from Mayor Wu of Boston, her Instagram account. And you know, she published this really to make the point of the current zoning code is actually quite restrictive to daycare and childcare options and uses in Boston. And so proposed zoning changes could actually begin to address a specific issue that constituents have, a demand that families have across the city, to begin to allow more childcare, daycare type of uses across the city. And so it's very clear, it's very imageable, but it's a way to use design actually to talk about zoning, to talk about density, to talk about the issues that we all face as or have faced as city officials at some point or another. And within that, and going back to New York a little bit and the PDC, is this notion that we've talked about before, but of creating clear design guidance and the expectation of what we want to see from the development community in developments in our city. And so this is Hunters Point South. This is some of the residential development that's happening adjacent to that park that we looked at earlier, that waterfront park that we looked at earlier. But the Quality Affordable Housing Design Guide is informing that development as it happens. And I think what's interesting is that New York City can take its more, you know, large swaths of development and really condense them to 8 principles, right? And everything from site planning to massing to materials and how you're using, to how you organize your facade, where you're putting your windows and doors, how you're treating your ground floor, how people are moving around your site, and how much open space you're contributing back to the city or to your end users, are all pretty universal issues that we see across the country. And so to think about how we might begin to implement design principles to really foster the type of design outcomes that we want to see in our cities becomes really valuable. And so in terms of implementation, you know, thinking about how we in the near term or in the now actually educate residents around the built environment and the implications of policy on it. So zoning, density, open space, traffic safety. And I think, you know, there's this saying that, you know, it's easier to engage with communities when you don't need something from them. So the idea that you're just going out for education and not because there's a specific project or development that has to happen. Educating staff and government stakeholders on your design principles, on your city's design principles and why they matter. And this third one is kind of important to me because we could, and I've had this argument many times, but you know, we could argue whether or not good design is more expensive or not. But I think what's important here is embracing the notion that good design has value beyond the upfront capital costs. Whatever they may be, we're going to have to build this library. We're going to have to build this school. You know, how can good design, how can we maximize that investment through good design and create a place that people feel worthy of and dignified to be in? And so in the near term, thinking about how you, once you've engaged residents and educated them, think about how you might engage residents around visioning for their communities, and then translating that feedback into actionable plans and visions. And then thinking more long-term about how do you implement that long-term planning and commission-built work that reflects the design priorities of your communities. And so that's it. I think I did okay on time. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gerardo. So we do still have about 15 minutes for Q&A. I'm just seeing all of this exploration that we've been doing for about the last year come together in some sort of package that you can see is very wide ranging. We've been exploring a lot of topics, and a few things from Gerardo's presentation just sort of rose to the top to me of reminding us about the things that the lessons that we're learning at large, maybe a little bit here. And maybe the first one, just very simply, that the importance of mayoral leadership. And, without going back to that slide where we've got the mayor in the center as the chief urban designer and all of these influences that are coming in. And the mayor's able to convene that and shape that, and how important it is to harness that role. We heard so many times. But if the mayor's setting the vision, then who's waking up every single day to implement whatever part of these initiatives that we're talking about? So we're so excited, like so glad that we've got a lot of senior staff represented here, because we know that you are the ones out waking up every day doing the work. But a thread that went through a few of the different topic areas that we explored here was this idea that mostly we've sort of seen and heard over and over again that cities are doing really great work, have got some really great plans, have had some great planning efforts, have great staff, and that often the problem with moving from that plan to implementation is things getting stuck. And that idea that, again, the mayor's office, a city hall email address, the backing of the mayor, of staff to move things forward and coordinate between planning, economic development, transportation, infrastructure to move things forward, how incredibly critical that is. And again, the role of the mayor behind it. Utilizing your partners that may not be the ones who are front of mind. So your university partners, nearby university partners, your professional partners. So architects, maybe through your local American Institute of Architects chapter, landscape architects, the American Society of Landscape Architects, the Urban Land Institute, ULI, these potential partners that you have in the work that you're doing, in various creative ways that you can engage them. And then, of course, back to this idea of communicating the value of good urban design. We love that example of Mayor Wu's Instagram as the city's undergoing a zoning rewrite, and we know how contentious those can be and how wonky they can also be. And so this idea of how you graphically represent, something in that case was more childcare facilities, the ability to build more childcare facilities throughout the city. So why people should care about it and how it impacts you in such a really crystal clear way. We also heard that that communication of that value was as important to staff and to fellow staff as it was to residents. And so we've got all of these things in mind as we look to create some more very specific tools and resources in the coming year. But we're excited and ready to take any questions that you might have, or anything that you heard today that is resonating with you specifically. And I'll turn it over to Grace to moderate us a little bit here.